What's this button do today?
Well, that's a wow 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 wow, but a little more digitized. New age doorbell.
New Age doorbell. Wow, I like New Age doorbell. Yes, everybody's still playing with the buttons on this thing. What's number one?
That is audience applause.
Oh, audience applause. There we go. So everybody, let's start the Auto Buyer's Guide podcast with some more audience applause since we don't have a live audience. Welcome to another Auto Buyer's Guide podcast. I'm still playing with my toy there, but today we're going to be talking software-defined cars, the Sony Honda drama updates, best cars under $40,000. We're going to dive into viewer comments and some viewer questions as well. So let's just get into it.
If you're looking for a new or used car to buy, maybe a truck or SUV or all-electric ride, we're the guys to help you decide on the Auto Buyer's Guide.
So Travis, this is a buzzword I hear a lot about, especially when you and I are at an event with a new EV. There are certain journalists, won't speak names, I love them dearly, but they will eventually go into this, well, it's not a software-defined car, so I just don't know why anybody would make an EV like this.
Software-defined car is an interesting concept. There is a lot more, I think, visible daily interactive software that happens in new cars these days. Obviously, we have much bigger infotainment screens, and we are interacting with that software, but that's not really what we're talking about, right?
Right. And the reason I'm thinking of this now, and it came to me this morning, is we just bought a Volvo EX30. If folks didn't know, we just snagged one. Travis was down here for the pickup. Excruciating dealer transaction details coming in a later episode.
Oh, boy.
But the EX30 is logically as software defined of a car as a Tesla is, which may blow some folks' minds, but let's just dial this back. So what was the first software defined car in your thought process, Travis?
Oh, it's a hard one. It's a very different answer than you came up with. And for me, it's really when we started seeing the software, right? Because obviously you have things like electronic fuel injection. Well, like that's a lot more software than previously existed. What happens when we have different drive modes, just a normal eco sport. Honestly, when you look at the first EVs, I would see the biggest software increases across a lineup. And so I would lean towards something like a Tesla, but you went a very different direction.
Yeah, I mean, if we want to be technical here, the first car with software was a 1968 Volkswagen because it was the first one with a primitive computer. Then a little bit later, we started having the first microprocessors, dedicated microprocessors in cars. That was also, around the 1970s-ish or so. GM wants to claim credit for that. There's some debate about that. I will say that when you really dive into this topic and you're talking to computer developers, so hardware and software engineers for the things that you and I are using right now to make this podcast and video work, they are of the opinion that there's no such thing currently as a software-defined car, and that it's more really of a buzzword. And there's definitely some tech journalists and tech commenters that are on this same bandwagon here, because it's not just about a touchscreen or a voice assistant, etc. Ultimately, these cars are all hardware defined because their maximum capability, the maximum extent of their capability is defined by hardware. And unlike the computers that you and I are using, there aren't just widgets that you can plug in or pair to the car that are going to vastly expand that capability. If you have a Tesla and you don't have the right hardware version to support full self-driving, you can upgrade your hardware, of course, take it to Tesla, which is kind of novel, but you can't just plug in a widget. I can't just, go snag a Mac Mini and somehow plug it into my Tesla and make it do the things that the car needs to be able to do.
And even if you do, you're adding new hardware, even if it's
Right.
an
Still
add-on
adding new hardware, which is kind of
Yeah.
interesting here. But let's talk about, let's go deeper, I guess I should say, because one industry analyst, I believe it's from Barron's, made this interesting point that the other problem they find with the term software-defined vehicle is that it ignores the hundreds of thousands of mechanical testing engineers, electrical engineers, designers, everybody that went into making those Teslas. I mean, it wasn't just the
Mhm.
software engineers. Tesla certainly has a lot of software engineers, but interestingly, far more of their employees are dedicated to the nuts and bolts of building the car, the safety research, et cetera, all that goes into that.
Mhm.
But since we're talking about software-defined cars, let's talk about what Tesla did innovate in and why we are starting to see these Tesla innovations in more new vehicles like our Volvo EX30. And the core here is the upgradability. Because up until this point, up until Tesla, we really did not see many new vehicles out there that had much on board that could be upgraded. This was not directly a Tesla thing, of course, because Microsoft had been pushing Microsoft's Windows embedded operating system into vehicles for a while. Do you remember Sync? Did your Ford Energy have Sync?
Yes, it did.
Or
Yep.
did you have my Ford Touch?
No, I had Sync.
Okay, okay.
I
I'm
just don't
sorry
remember which
about
version.
that. My condolences. Actually, I loved Sync to begin with, but Sync really was one of the first more modern software computer integration things that we find in vehicles today. The software was intended to be upgradable, although it rarely was. Um, my Ford Touch definitely was able to be upgraded as well. The core hardware on board suffered from some of the problems that lessons were learned for later. So hardware was slow. I mean, you probably recognized that, right? Like you touch
Mhm.
something and you're like, wait for it, wait for it. It's like you're running
Yep.
Windows 11 on a computer from 2015. It just wasn't a good fit.
It could
And
do it,
it
but
could,
only
should
technically.
it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think what Tesla really pushed the boundary on was taking that concept of software that could be improved and fixed and changed over time. And then A, they actually changed it over time.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then B, they gave themselves the hardware room to make it work. So they gave us computers on board, not just the interface computer, but the other processing centers on the vehicle. They gave them headroom, storage, processing power, memory, etc., that was necessary for those unknown future upgrades. And then also importantly, extra bandwidth between these modules on board. So that way, if an extra function was cooked up later, they could all communicate still relatively nicely with one another. And that is something that we're still seeing most of the mainline car companies working towards. And this is where now I think we need to start our debate because the question I have is this not necessarily a good idea or a bad idea? Because I think it is a good idea. Is it well done? Or are we seeing lazy car companies as a result? Are we seeing car companies that are like, nah, I'll fix that in software?
We see a lot of vehicles that are in early production or pre-production prototypes, um, and we are often told we're still working on the software. And for
Hmm.
us, that makes sense because we are not the end consumer. But the number of new vehicles that are very heavily it does lean towards EVs, but again, we're talking about software that consumers interact with more often. That's kind of user interface stuff. We see these things. I think the quality is dropping right now. I think they'll say we can fix this later. And when I look at Tesla as an example of a software defined car, as close as it gets, one of the reasons I would give them that label is because the software updates, which I think are required to even begin with this label as a this vehicle will get software updates, um, have changed significant things about the vehicle. They have increased efficiency. They have increased drive power. They have improved certain features. So, better traction control because those are all able to be upgraded in programming, those sorts of things. Uh, but we've also seen Tesla roll out a truck that will have locking differentials or their versions of it, and it'll come later. And then it did. But what we get is a product with a promise, and you just have to count on that promise being carried through. And that's not something I think consumers should have to deal with at all. If it's offered and it's in the literature, it's on the website, this vehicle has, then it should come with that from square one. But if something is added later, that's a bonus. And I don't think that's harmful to the consumer, because that's something that would happen in a refresh in a later date. But you can buy a 2025 right now that might get a 2027 feature, and that is just to the benefit of the consumer. But you shouldn't get a 2025 that's running 2024 software when it should have had everything included from the word go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is a tricky concept because the counter argument to some of this definition is that so far there is truly nothing that Tesla has done as far as their updates that a Honda Accord could not have done over that same time period. So, if we're talking about an electric Accord, there are efficiency changes and profile improvements that can be done in software. It's just you'd have to take your Honda to the dealer to get that updated in the before times. Now we have, of
Mhm.
course, the Prologue, which is a GM car that can be fully updated if they're following that very similar model. Um,
Yeah.
but in the before times, there were changes that happened because the car company is like, well, we're going to tweak this, we're going to tweak that, but things were very stable. So in the before times when we were looking at pre-production cars, most often the pre-production nature of the vehicle was the plastics aren't right. Maybe the paint is a little bit wonky. Maybe there's a supplier issue here or there, or even more often, it was that you were testing cars that had a combination of options that would just never happen in reality because they
Mhm.
hadn't really decided how the option packages were going to line up, right? But
Right.
now we're testing cars where they're like, yeah, that's gonna have phone as key, and that's gonna have CarPlay and phone as key, and it's gonna have satellite radio, and it's gonna have this and that and that. We just sort of haven't finished the software yet, and that's where I wonder, is this simply encouraging laziness? Because the EX30 auto high beams don't work. It doesn't charge as quickly as you'd think. We don't have that
Mhm.
phone as key. It has CarPlay. It's a little kooky. Um, but there are a lot of features seemingly that are yet to come. And then there are
Yeah.
just the bugs that are still being ironed out. But this new mode of following Tesla's example means that there are bugs on the car when it's delivered, and hopefully they'll fix them over time. I think Tesla and Rivian have been better about actually, pushing software updates that fix bugs.
Yep.
But then they've also been known for creating bugs.
Yeah, and that is going to happen anytime you're dealing with software. And I do think that's one thing that is avoidable, but it's more understandable. So if they push an update and then they find a bug later, you can do your in-house testing, but until it gets in consumers' hands, and you get the testing base amplified, 100,000 fold, it makes sense that we go, oh, we found something that we had missed, or this is a bigger issue than we thought it was, and we can go back and fix that. You wouldn't allow that 20 years ago
Mhm.
in an infotainment system where you go, hey, this doesn't work. We were playing the other day with our Volvo C40's software a little bit, and it turns out when you start fiddling with software, sometimes things don't go exactly as you planned. But that's stuff that should be figured out at the factory level and shouldn't roll out to the consumer with some of those glaring issues. And I will say Tesla and Rivian are going to be basically the first two companies that I think people would think about when it comes to software defined
Mhm.
vehicles, and that's because they're so forward on this trend, because they're not a legacy auto manufacturer. They haven't been in this system where once things roll out, that's it. But I will also say that it's not just electric vehicles that have this software, baked into them. It just feels more present. When you talk about a lot of Ford products these days, you're able to go back to the dealer and say, "Hey, I want more power," and they do that with a software update. I mean, what
Exactly.
it is reflashing the ECU, but that is essentially just a software update, and that's still
Yep.
happening. That's happening on internal combustion engines.
Your software-defined Raptor. There we go.
Correct.
Um, that is your point on the XC40 actually is, or C40 rather, is a very interesting one because for the listeners that don't know, we also have a Volvo C40. So you have two Volvos at the same time. That was not how this was planned. The EX30 was the one we wanted. We
Mhm.
started thinking, hey, that's never going to happen. This whole Chinese tariff drama, that's going to just wreck the possibility of this ever occurring. So what we're going to do is go out and find a used C40 and try and do a different story on used EVs and battery life, etc. Seems like very
Mhm.
few people were interested in my thought process. Sorry, guys. So then, literally only a few weeks later, our Volvo dealer reaches out and they're like, "Hey, that EX30 you ordered has just turned up." In the meantime, Travis did a road trip in the C40. Be sure and check
Mhm.
out those videos on the EV Buyer's Guide channel. And then we heard some comments from folks going like, "Yeah, just go download this software from Space Tech called Orbit, and you can hack into your Volvo and turn on adaptive cruise control." So here's one of those software-defined features in a vehicle that is somewhere between worlds. I think that in
Mhm.
the classic definition, a lot of folks wouldn't call the current Volvo models outside EX90 and EX30. I don't think that most people would call those software-defined vehicles. Do you think?
No, I don't think they would.
But intriguingly, they truly are because A, they're over-the-air updatable. So every part of the C40 is over-the-air updatable. They can make efficiency improvements and things like that. So totally capable. But also lots of opportunity is left on the table. I think that's how I'll say is that because turns out the C40, every C40 and XC40 recharge sold in the US, actually sold around the world, has everything on board needed to support adaptive cruise control, the aggressive lane centering, the pilot assist thing, low speed crawl with the steering, blah, blah, blah. But it is turned off in software. And all you have to do literally is hack into the thing, check an option box, and hit save. And hey,
Mhm.
presto, you have adaptive cruise control. So this makes me ask if that is the way that it is,
Mhm.
and it is internet connected, and there's an
Mhm.
app on my phone,
Mhm.
and it's software updatable, OTA, etc. Why is the Volvo not capitalizing on this? Why is there not an option for them to go, hey guys,
To unlock
if
it.
you want adaptive cruise control, you can do it for $200.
That's a good question. And I think that, first of all, it feels like a very legacy auto manufacturer mindset where they say, hey, listen, we are sticking to these trim levels. And that's really how things have been lined up. You can, you can, you can have the same vehicle, and we see this. I think again, it's more obvious these days. But you can see the vehicle with the same pieces in them, but it's just a software turned off. And from a manufacturing standpoint, it makes sense to just buy it in larger bulk and
Mm-hmm.
not turn that system on than it is to have two different systems, right? Um, but but then it would be too confusing to the consumer because why would I buy the ultimate trim that gets adaptive cruise if I could just get the plus trim and then it have adaptive cruise, right? So
Yeah,
I can understand the thought process there. That Volvo, for example, is one of the only vehicles I've ever seen that has a button with an icon that you can't use instead of a button blank,
exactly. And that should be like
and that's wild to me.
yeah, you should press that button. The infotainment system should say, oh, looking for adaptive cruise control? You
Mhm.
didn't buy it, but you can click
Tap
here
your
and you
card on the
can buy
display
it now.
screen, and you can activate
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Now, I will say that I know that there are a lot of folks out there that hate the idea of the subscription services. BMW gave it a whirl for a hot second with CarPlay, and people revolted. And in Europe, there were a few more dabbles on this front.
Mhm.
I'm not necessarily defending that, although I am one of the few people that don't think it's the worst idea I have heard. On the Volvo side, it's an electric car. It has electric power steering, so like that hardware's there for the steering thing.
Mhm.
It's doing blended braking for regeneration, so it has the braking modules to
Mhm.
control the brakes electronically, and it has a radar sensor because pretty much all Volvos do because that's the way they offer the expanded autonomous emergency braking. So cameras are lovely, but if you want that next level of AEB, where you have pedestrian detection, cyclist detection, junction turning assistant detection, all that jazz, you need a radar sensor to really make more of that work. So you can see what the object is on the camera, determine where it's going in relation to the car with the radar, et cetera. So that's why it's there. But then also, if it's there, you can do the cruise control thing. And this is just an interesting philosophy. I mean, no, we're going to see more of this, but is it good? Is it bad? I would say it's good if the car companies either A, let you add these features later, whether that's for free or for purchase, which actually we should probably talk about in a second. But it's not really useful if all this does is keep your software up to date for bug fixes.
I agree. Having available for update for bug fixes is a good thing, but it should not be the qualifier.
Mhm.
And I think that if a vehicle comes out fully baked, they have it exactly the way they want it. They spend a lot of time in R&D and in testing, and they never make a change to it. I do not think that's a bad thing. That just means they did their job right the first time. I think if they say, uh, let's stick with EVs for a moment, but let's say, hey, we have the power numbers, the range numbers, the efficiency, performance of vehicle systems that we were shooting for. Awesome, we're going to roll the car out, but we are going to keep working on it, and it's in parallel with working on what we would do for updates for the next refresh or the next model year, those sorts of things. I don't see a problem with having that be part of the, hey, this is what we were hoping for. We found more. We're going to give that to you on the back end. I will say, a lot of that stuff comes in when you look at Rivians and Teslas for free. So Tesla
Mhm.
owners of original, first year models have got a vastly different vehicle than they first bought in a good way.
Yep.
More performance, more charging, better range, those sorts of things have all been added to the vehicle. That is what we call an absolute win. But you can't roll out a vehicle that's half baked. And I think that's where we're going to run into issues. And I think that's what we have seen a
Mhm.
little bit. Like I mentioned, that Cybertruck, this is a truck. You can take it off road. There's tons of videos of people who took it off road and didn't think or know or realize that you're going to need some more hardware activated, and it is currently not
Mhm.
because the software is not complete, and that's where I think we run into issues. Um, I don't think you would see some of those legacy brands doing that because they want the fully baked model. They don't want to play the oh, we'll figure it out later. They're worried about brand image and
Mhm.
reliability because people will look at that as a reliability issue. I think software has the potential to be a huge benefit to everyone, but just like anything else, if it becomes sort of a crutch for the manufacturers to lean back on, I think
Mhm.
that's where it can start hurting folks.
Yeah, there's sort of this question of, does Tesla get a pass? Sort of, their models have not changed design-wise appreciably, really, since they launched. So we've seen subtle changes to S and X over time, yoke versus wheel, et cetera, new bumpers, new
Very
lights,
subtle,
this,
yeah.
that, right? And ditto, we're seeing upgrades and evolutions of Model 3 and Model Y now. But ultimately, they're very much the same vehicle. Would this level of software definition, in a way, be possible if instead of that same Model S over this period of time, we got a radically new and different Model S, and therefore we couldn't have those same software resources working on the old one because those customers aren't paying us
Hmm.
anymore. And that is
Hmm.
tangential to my next question. How much would you be willing to pay for ongoing software updates in your Tesla? What if Tesla came back and they said, "Hey, your hardware revision, are you on hardware 3 or 4, do you know?"
Hardware 3.
So it's like if they
Yeah.
say, too few people are on hardware 3 anymore, we're on hardware 6 or 7 now. So if you still want updates, you're going to have to pay for them. And then there was some tiny team out there dedicated to trying to patch software revisions down where applicable to your hardware version. Would you want that? Or would you just say, that's good, I'm just going to write it out at this
See,
software?
that's something I don't think I would pay a subscription for. Like if it was a monthly connectivity fee, to say, hey, you're eligible. I think if it was bundled into something, so Tesla does have a
Hmm.
connectivity plan that I don't subscribe to. If getting the connectivity plan included the software updates as part of its pricing, then if I wanted the other features, I'd probably go with it. But otherwise, I'd actually prefer something along the lines of a pay per update option, because if update,
Mhm.
one after I bought it doesn't appreciably change anything, neither does update two, but update three does. Even if I had to, by default purchase one and two as part of three, but they came at sort
Mhm.
of a discounted rate because it's just continued processing. That would be something I would be more interested in, because there's no guarantee what an update would or wouldn't include. And there are plenty of these updates that are essentially nothing. It says bug fixes and that's it. Sometimes they're massive changes to things like it's, full self-driving capability, full self-driving capability, that sort of
Air
thing.
quotes.
Those are big ones, right? Those are obviously going to change the way the vehicle performs. So I don't think I would sign up for just a flat subscription model and say, hey, I want to have the connectivity. But
Mm.
I think the big thing here is for people to have options. So when I buy a car, I like to think that I bought the car and I am happy with everything that it does right then. If it does something better later, that would be cool, but I didn't buy it for what can it do later. I bought it for what it can do right now. So as long as I'm not punished for not getting those updates, then I'm on board. So if it's a safety thing, right? People hacking into your vehicle, more air quotes, but people hacking into your vehicle. If it's a safety fix, I think that should be sort of a requirement. But you look at phones, and right now we're seeing manufacturers of the big phones, right? So your Google handsets, Samsungs, that sort of thing. Obviously, Apple, they say, hey, we'll support this phone for the next
Right.
3 to 5 years. Well, that tells you what the shelf life is on your phone improving,
Right.
and I think it's the same thing for a car. So maybe the updates should be required within the
Yep.
standard warranty window.
And
That makes sense, right?
the smartphone parallel seems is worth noting here, because there is this sort of mantra that the modern car is just a smartphone on wheels. It's not really. It's definitely very different from that,
Right.
but there is something worth noting there. It's like, I do hear from people that are like, "Well, Apple updates their phones longer, and so, their software updates being delivered to Apple handsets for longer periods of time and further models back, and the update happens right away." So Apple's like, "Hey, this is new iOS whatever," and that same day, you get to update your iPhone 2. I'm being facetious, of course,
Yeah. Well,
but
say
there is a
generally those are more stable.
reason
Right.
for this as well, and the reason I think actually is this Tesla parallel. So I've always actually found it kind of humorous that there's a tie between anti-Apple people and pro-Tesla people, because Apple and
Hmm.
Tesla are both the same kind of isolated ecosystem in
Yep.
slightly different ways here, but the reason I think is the same here. So Apple creates a new software build, they create a small number of phones. They really don't have a huge cornucopia, kaleidoscope of models, right? So it's a lot easier to be like, we're going to work on the software update for these 6 or 7 handset models that go back a long time. It's a lot easier than Samsung, that's got a bazillion different phone models all around the world, and then they're like,
Yep.
"Yeah, we're gonna update the new ones, and then later we're gonna update the year-old ones, and then maybe if we get to it, we're gonna roll that one down the hill." So, it is understandable that there is this difference there, and that's kind of where I wonder where the traditional mainline car companies are gonna come into this play. Volvo has significantly more models than Tesla does
Hmm.
already on sale around the world, and riding on different versions of different platforms. So we've got the CMA platform underneath the C40 and XC40, and the upcoming EC names of those. We've got the SPA platform on XC60, V60, S60, blah blah blah, the traditional bigger ones. We've got SPA 2 under EX90, which is not the same as the platform under the EM90 and EX30, the Chinese model minivan and the baby SUV. Those are tied with a different product family. And then we're going to see SPA 3 coming soon for the next generation of Volvo's larger products in Europe and America. So they've got a lot of platforms, a lot of model variation. I mean, they got short wagons and long wagons and jacked up wagons and short sedans and big sedans and SUVs and three-row things and this and that and the other, right? So in this world, do we rationally believe that Volvo is going to spend or can even spend as much time on specific models as someone like Tesla can? Because Tesla's only got 5 things to choose from, right? And
Yeah.
S and X, very closely related, basically the same
Yep.
hardware and software is run in the Jazz. Ditto
Yep.
for 3 and Y. So they've got really only, and there's synergies between Cybertruck and some of the others, but ultimately they've really only got 3 platforms to worry about, and largely they can push software builds that will work, in these pairings. So these 3
Yeah.
things, right? That is very different than a mainline car company that needs to redesign the car every 6 years, significantly refresh the car every 3 years. I just don't know if we would ever see that parallel unless the customer is willing to handle a BMW, a Volvo, or Mercedes that just doesn't change for as long as Model S has not changed. And this is where I want to reach
Yeah.
out to customers. So viewers, before we get to that, viewers,
Yeah.
let us know because we forget to solicit the feedback here. So type those
Please.
comments. Send us voicemails. You can call 669-842-1947. Again, that's 669-842-1947. You can also email us voice memos to hey@autobuyersguide.com because we want to know what you all think.
And I was just going to say, we've talked about Tesla, and you get like Rivian, and Rivian is essentially in the same. They've got one thing that they've got 2 bodies on one platform, right? Then we talked about Volvo, but we haven't talked about General Motors. We haven't talked about Toyota. You look at these much larger reaching manufacturers that do share a lot of parts, but they share them in different ways. And so I think that's the question is, it's not would people be satisfied with the vehicle not changing like a lot of people are doing today, right? Most people are buying a car assuming that it's just going to operate the same way all the time. And again, that's how I went into my Tesla was I'm buying it at this point in time. This meets my needs. This does what I want it to do. Everything else is sort of a bonus, and that's where it becomes a phone parallel because you should buy the phone because it does what you want it to. But if it gets better or a refresh in the UI, that's sort of a thing, then great, cool, wonderful. But you'd have to pay for it, and that's really where I think you're going to run into issues. One of the things about not getting software updates on a phone is that incentivizes you to buy a new phone. And so if you get that software updates ending, I think for people who are buying their new cars, they go, oh my gosh, here's another reason for me to buy a new car. And I think that's the only way that a manufacturer could justify it being free, saying, hey, we are going to continue to put time and resources into this because they obviously want to have a positive experience for that user. So the user wants to feel like the consumer wants to get the most out of their product. They also have to make sure that other manufacturers are doing it because otherwise they're flushing money down the drain unnecessarily in R&D. But the biggest thing for me is that if it becomes another lever to pull to get that person out of that car and back into a newer one, then I think it makes sense for it to be just free. Otherwise, folks would end up paying for it. And I don't think they want to because historically we have not paid for software updates for our cars.
There have been very few things, right? So, once upon a time we used to pay for map updates, CD-ROM or online map updates. There's still
I've heard of that.
still some map updates that need to happen. And some car companies are charging, of course, connectivity fees for the software to keep working. Toyota is getting hammered real hard in some areas. I know a decent number of journalists that are constantly complaining about this. Oh, after 1 year, Toyota makes me pay to have my remote start work on my app. And it's like, yeah, because it has a cell modem in that thing, and cell modems cost about the same as your data plan on your phone. Yeah, they're getting a discount because they got hundreds of thousands of cell modems out there, but it's not free. Connecting to the cellular network costs money. So there has to be some cost to that. And this makes me wonder. So, seniors buy a significant number of cars every year. I don't know. Are your grandparents still alive?
No, they are not.
Okay, so sure, someone's grandparents out there still alive. My parents are old enough to be grandparents. They actually they are grandparents. Let's correct that. Sorry, mom and dad. You are grandparents. But they're talking about they've been defeatist in this philosophy that we're preparing to buy our last car, and it did make me also ponder. So if you are, let's say, a little less inclined towards change, a little bit more stuck in your
Set in your
ways.
ways.
You know, maybe
Mhm.
you're Joe Biden and the brain's not working right anymore, right? Do we really think that they could handle a software update where the interface changes and it just magically happens? They hop in their car one day and they're like, I don't know where my button is. Um,
Let me answer that
or
question with
hang on,
another
or
anecdote.
could they handle a bug? Could they really handle a bug in their new software where they're like, it doesn't do the thing anymore, and then you have to like FaceTime them to be like,
Mhm.
okay, mom and dad, your glove box button moved 2
Mhm.
millimeters to the left.
Correct. The number of people, and I mean, I think folks listening to our podcast who watch our channel are probably, a lot more plugged into cars and automotive than your average consumer. The number of people who have no idea what their car does is astonishing. And the number of times that I have played product specialist for fill in the name brand and said, oh, here's how you connect your phone. Here's how you can, your car has features that you've never used because you didn't know it existed. Your mirrors can fold in. You can set the preconditioned timing so it's the same temperature every morning. These are all things that are already there that people aren't utilizing because they don't know is there. And a lot of those folks are upper decades, not lower decades. Um,
Hey, it's like, hey,
they
no
think
harm
they,
here. It's like I don't learn things as quickly as I did when I was younger. My eyes don't work as well. I know, I know this is coming. I know
yeah,
that I am going to be that 70-year-old person that's going to be calling my kid at some point, going like, so where, how does this thing work? They updated my software on my whatever
darn
the
fangled contraption.
whatever conglomerate owns the world at this point in time. It's probably
Yeah.
going to be like the unholy union of Sony Honda Ford. I bought my
Hmm.
my latest Sony Honda Ford,
Hmm.
and they moved my button. It's going to
Yeah.
be me.
Yeah. Help me find it. Okay. Well, go ahead and turn the camera on so I can see it. No, no, no. Not on your face, on the car. Okay.
Hmm.
No, that button is on the left side of the screen. No, no, not the
Yep.
car screen, the phone screen. Exactly.
Hmm.
Like we're running into this problem.
We will be
The other
there.
thing is, the other thing is the manufacturer would then have to support that change. So they would have to put out a video. They would 100% expect the dealership.
You
Uh,
think I'm going
the
to be watching
dealership
videos
would
at
expect.
70? I wouldn't know how to use them on my space tablet.
Well, it's going to be on your glasses. It's going to all just beam in. The thing is, dealerships are going to get people dropping by going, hey, this changed. Can you help me? And then the problem there is that dealerships are not paid to do that. So they would be doing it for customer satisfaction and a hopefully return rate. But they don't get incentivized to teach somebody how to use their car after they bought it.
What's that, Sonny? You got to
Not the
talk into my
process.
good ear. Got to talk into my good ear.
And my batteries are dead on the hearing aids. They need a wireless recharge.
And that brings us
Yeah.
along to the Sony Honda thing. Speaking of
While we're
Sony
there.
Honda Ford, Ford is not involved, sorry. So Sony Honda has said dealers are mad. No dealers, they've confirmed this, and no
Mhm.
dealers even for service. There was this question as to whether they would try and service the cars at Honda dealers. No, apparently Crash Champions collision repair centers will handle service nationwide.
Have you ever heard of Crash Champions, or is that a brand new name to you? Because for
That is
me,
a
that's a
brand new name.
and is it the name of a series? They've got different other names that we would know more closely. I don't know, but here's the thing: when you're
Huh?
looking at electric
There are a lot
vehicles,
of them. I did some Googling.
okay,
Apparently there's one like right around the corner from where I am now. It's like less than half a mile away.
I might have to do a little driving to get to one, but I'm sure I could find it. The thing is, with EVs, there is a lot less general maintenance that has to happen to the vehicle. But when you need to service it, there are still going to be some service issues. So, what are they doing? Your routine maintenance is things like checking some fluids. Obviously, there's a lot less in an electric vehicle, like we find in this a Fila and whatever else
Mhm.
comes from this. Tire rotations. Hopefully, the repair center could handle that, but obviously they probably don't specialize in it. They can just make sure things are on the way they're supposed to be. But it's an interesting way to do it, and obviously the main focus here is that they're keeping dealers out of it, which is something we hear from a lot of consumers. They do not want to go to a dealership, so I think they would probably rather buy their car at the price that it says from from the website and it gets dropped off, or they go pick it up from a delivery center or something like that. As long as pricing is transparent, and then the service is manageable, there's not infinite wait times, or hey, we're looking for parts, that sort of thing. As long as pricing is transparent, which I think is a big part of this whole process, then I don't see a reason not to try something different. But it is definitely different.
Mm-hmm. And so I pulled up this here. So Crash Champions was known as Service King Collision Repair. Is that any more familiar? They have 335 locations. Weirdly, they are concentrated in some strange locations. So there are only 22 states covered, 50 states in the country, if anybody is not counting there.
Keeping track. Let me tell you, between Seattle and Portland, there are 0. So I'd be going one of those directions.
Yeah, this is an interesting choice. I mean, not that there are going to be very many Sony Hondas out there because they're a $100,000 thing. But I am intrigued to see how this battle goes because they have been sued by practically every national dealer association that is out there, just like Volkswagen with the Scout thing.
Yeah, they're not the only one in this fight. And I think the manufacturers know that this is going to be a fight. And I think that does tell you a number of things because they're willing to try it out.
Yep.
It tells you that not only are consumers not really stoked on the dealer model, but the manufacturers are also looking for ways out of it. For those who don't know, dealer laws and the abilities that they have, the influence they have over their operation is pretty extensive. They are ground in there deep. So the fact that Sony Honda, you get Volkswagen, then you have folks like Volvo / Polestar who didn't want to go head to head against those dealer networks, but they're trying to do a little bit of a way around it. It shows that things are changing. So over the next couple of years, that's going to be one of the most points of interest that I have is what happens to the dealer network, because they're kind of under attack, and they're under attack from both sides. Consumers don't necessarily want to deal with it anymore. They have a lot of negative experiences, and then manufacturers say, you know what? I wonder if we can bring this back into our own zone.
Yeah, these will be the fights to watch. Watch the Sony Honda, watch the Scout. That will be the sign of things to come. That brings us along to best cars under $40,000. There are about 75 new vehicles you can get in the 2025 model year that are under $40,000. We had a very generic question here. I am very torn because I was all over the map when I kind of went down the list of like, oh, what's in this bucket? What would I not mind driving in this very broad range of things? What are your top picks from the list?
So, and everyone has a bias, so I'll throw my bias out there. I prefer things smaller, sportier, more interesting. But I will say that one of the first things that pops to mind for under 40,000, as far as like a bang for the buck, is something like a Chevy Traverse. That is a lot of vehicle. It's a lot of space and a lot of capability. Things you're going to be missing versus a more expensive 3-row offering are going to be things like powertrain options, because they don't really exist, or a lot of power, which also is not going to be the highlight of that. But I would, if it was my money and it says, here's what you get to go get, I'm probably leaning towards something like a Prius Prime, because that does a lot of things for under 40,000. I couldn't get the top end trim. I couldn't get every single option on it, but that would probably be where I lean. I'm also tempted to trick out a Bronco Sport, and that's a very different direction. But
I have to admit that the two that really, really piqued my interest that I have thought about recently would be Maverick, because they finally gave it a few more niceties inside, and it's still a really solid deal. Its price has gone up because everybody figured out, hey, this is a fantastic thing. Very practical. And then Bronco Sport, equally as interesting. I think it looks fantastic. I think the new off-roady trims are going to do well for them. But there's some great options out there aside from that. Mustang also came to the list. I don't know why there's so many Fords actually that that came to me. But I think that
Yeah.
those are all some really stellar options. Also, you could get a hybrid Sorento, possibly a plug-in hybrid Sorento around this price. Plug-in hybrid's going to be a little bit
Mhm.
over there, but there are going to be some decent plug-in hybrids that are going to be good long-term as far as reliability, dependability, and cost of operations. Before we move on to the next topic, let me just go down the list of highlights that I found, and then if you had any extras that you want to toss in here, let me know. But
Okay.
basically, I think Mustang's a solid option. Accord Hybrid, specifically the hybrid model. Prius
Mhm.
WRX, also a good winner because it is relatively inexpensive. It's a four-door
Yep.
sedan, it's pretty practical, and it's a ton of fun in a segment where a lot of manufacturers are not giving us fun and all-wheel drive and relatively easy to live with.
Right.
Civic Hybrid, also good fun. Santa Fe, boxy, a little high-waisted, funky in the back, but also good deal. Traverse, as we
Mhm.
mentioned before. I think also the Chevy Trax, which is about half of this cost. It's really, really cheap. Equinox EV is, I think, a solid option in here as well. As long as that tax credit hangs out, it's going to be
Yep.
significantly less than $40,000 because it's right around there starting anyway. The Nero plug-in hybrid's another one. CX50, the CRV, not necessarily CRV hybrid, but definitely RAV4 hybrid. Maverick, Bronco Sport, Subaru Outback, I think is also a really great thought.
Yeah.
And if we get the rear-wheel drive Volvo EX30, I'd probably toss that in as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's that's going a different direction than a lot of these are going to offer, and things like my Tesla doesn't exist anymore because it got rid of the smallest battery. So things really do start to narrow down a little bit. But I think the good news, we've talked about it before. We've done under $30,000 lists, and we really could. God, we could spend a lot of time going under 25, under 30, under 20, 35, under
Yeah.
40. But there are still a lot of good vehicle options under the average, retail sales price of a vehicle. And I appreciate that that still exists. It's just one thing we see is that we start seeing more and more and more models or trims of models available for over that $50,000 mark. But thankfully, there are still some good, fun, reliable, practical, efficient. There's a lot of options down there.
Yep, and I hope we see more of those soon. I know that Stellantis, I can't remember exactly how they phrased this, but we're going to be getting a affordable Jeep. And I believe their definition of affordable is closer to $25,000 than 35. So
Okay,
thank God. Hopefully we
starting. Yeah,
will. Hopefully it's not going to be just some sort of abomination where they rebadge some sort of crazy thing from somewhere else, unless it's a rebadged Opal, and then I am all on board with that. But
I'm at least all ears.
hopefully, yeah, hopefully it's okay. So hopefully they have learned their lesson because General Motors is making off like a bandit with the affordable vehicles. I was really shocked by the significant increase in sales in their quartet of under 25 things. So the Encore, the Envista, the Trailblazer, and the Track. Somehow that was difficult to get through in my brain.
Mhm.
But they almost sold 500,000 of those things last year, and sales were
Yeah.
significantly up, just proving that there is a market for a decently put together affordable car.
Yeah, they've kind of run away with that particular segment at the moment. I mean, it's kind of the hottest new offering. Um, it's not quite an old excuse me, an old Chevy Sonic or something like that, right? But the consumer's getting more for the dollar as well. Um, I just want to see more options, and I would
Mhm.
also I think it's notable that you're not seeing some of the other brands, like you don't see GMC or Cadillac getting variants of this particular model. But the fact that we have specific models at lower price points for a thriftier consumer is absolutely a good thing.
Yep. And that brings us along to the viewer comments. Want to read that first one off to us?
Yeah, let's see here. This is from a regular viewer, goes by Right Lane Hog. From the perspective of someone who's gone almost 17 years without a car payment, I feel obliged to mention that affordable to buy and affordable to own are very different consumer experience, and that is absolutely correct. Especially,
Mhm.
I know we talk a lot about new cars, but especially when it comes to used cars.
Mhm. And, it's great. It's great that he is really wealthy and he just pays cash for his cars. I would love to not have a car payment too.
I think that might be holds the vehicles longer than buys a
I'll
new one with cash every other
I'll
year.
I'll go with that. I'll go with that.
But
No,
I
I
but I
agree.
will
I
say,
agree.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. But the interesting part here is that often these are very intertwined because, well, you may statistically find greater reliability in a RAV4. It is most likely going to cost you more still over 20 years than a Chevy Trax. Because even
Yes.
if you have to put a new engine in that Trax at 200,000 miles, guess what? That car was super cheap. Its engine super cheap. So most affordable car to own is almost always the one you already own.
Yes, and I will say that I had before my Tesla, the last car I'd purchased was an Audi A3 e-tron, and I bought that for around 22,500. Really enjoyed the vehicle, and I had some people go, "Oh, it's an Audi," and I was like, "Yeah, it's an Audi priced like a Honda Civic," but the difference was in the maintenance, and just
Mhm.
the maintenance cost was going to be close to $1,000 a year, or more. I mean, I think the first service that I had on it, and it was only a couple years old, so it was like a lease return. The first service was gonna be like $1,200, and I have never paid for a regular maintenance service that was $1,200 on any other vehicle. Obviously, you can get some repairs or some bigger things start to add up, but this was just kind of a routine drop in. And so, one of the things I tell people when you see a really expensive like supercar, hypercar out on the road, I said, the craziest thing is that the driving it or owning it is not the flashy bit. Driving it is, because keeping those things on the road is more expensive than just buying
Mhm.
them out.
And that's where I'm gonna be interested to see how long-term maintenance costs look on the EX30 or what they really look like because EX30 is pretty cheap. And so does that mean that brakes are going to be cheap? Does that mean obviously there's no oil to change on a regular basis? I mean, the motor units contain oil, but you don't change it every 10,000 miles. So intrinsically, because it's an EV, there should be lower costs, but there are still going to be maintenance costs longer term. The air filters, the brakes, tires are obviously
Tires.
going to be expensive because they're a little on the bigger side versus some EVs, especially a $35,000 EV from somewhere else. But
Yep.
it is going to be interesting to see how that plays and whether it does well in the U.S. market because I was shocked. I priced it out, and for some reason, I thought the Lexus UX, because let's be totally frank, it's cheap and nasty. I had assumed it was cheap, and I thought, well, surely the rational cross with like a UX versus EX30 is going to be like, well, yeah, but the Lexus is super cheap and it's a hybrid, so it's easy to integrate into your life. Actually, the UX hybrid is more expensive, starting and
Mhm.
more expensive, roughly comparably equipped. Only it's
Yeah.
going to take. What did this end up timing out to be? It's going to take 3 times longer to get 0 to 60.
Yes. Well, to be fair, that EX30 is quite the sprinter. But it's
Shockingly
fair.
quick.
It's true. So we're just
Mhm.
we're just speaking facts.
And then let's go on to our 5-star review on the Apple Podcasts. If you have not 5-star reviewed us, have you 5-star reviewed us, Travis?
You know, it's
You know,
still
you
on my
had
to-do list.
one you had one job. One
I've got a couple jobs.
job. You had one job to do, no excuse. We have one from Tortius that says, "Love me some Alex, and I'm writing this review because he told me to." Well, thank you. I wish others were as obedient as you were. Um, in here, out there,
hmm
wherever the
Not speaking to
obedience
anyone
is
in
required.
particular, just throwing it out into the world.
My future children probably very disobedient, so I need to learn for that, but that's okay. That brings us along to our viewer questions here. John from BC writes in, "What's the best SUV for a family under $50,000?" And we're going to go under $50,000 US here for ease, bearing in mind that sometimes cars in Canada can be a little bit more, or a little bit less than America, and
Yeah,
sometimes quite a bit more just due to weird options things. But my focus here, I think, would be basically, hate to say it, SUVs probably the way to go, or a jacked up wagon because they're going to be
probably.
easier for
Yep.
you to get kids in and out of. Um, especially when you're starting with infants and you've got several years of literally putting them in and out of child seats. Those taller door openings, those are going to make your job a little bit easier, and focus on child seat friendly features. So really, really zero in on combined legroom. I know I say this over and over again, but remember, front seats move forward and backward. There
Mhm.
are some car companies that play some funny business with their legroom measurements, Ford. Um, but by and large, they follow the SAE rules, and you can tell how much room there is between the firewall and the rear seat back by looking at that combined legroom number. So don't just fixate on rear legroom because the front seat moves back. Look at them together. And that means in the compact SUV segment, I'd be looking at Sportage, CRV Tucson, and Forester. Those are the biggest there. You're going to get actually quite a lot of room, especially for those rear-facing seats. In the mid-size segment, Atlas and Outback. That's the one wagon exception, although keep in mind the roofline is low, so you're going to be bopping that if you're a taller person trying to get kids in and out. The Honda Passport looks big, but it's actually kind of tight because of that combined legroom number. It's a little bit better in the current one.
Mhm.
And then on the three-row front, I would look for, especially if you want a three-row, not everybody needs a three-row if you're just having one kid, but I would look for child seat friendly features, again, like the tilt slide mechanism that can let you leave a child seat anchored into place. You'll find that in Traverse, Acadia, Atlas, Pathfinder, and just a very small limited number of others in North America. So the big reason there is it's not just about forward-facing child seats. If you need to get people in and out of the back, because that's the safest place for kids to be, if you don't have a person up front, you can leave that front seat, actually, front passenger seat, moved further forward, and you can still tilt and slide with a rear-facing child seat actually installed there as well to get back into the third row. So pretty handy, and your kids are going to be in some form of child restraint for forever. Not like when we were kids, even when Travis, the youngster here, was a kid, back last year when you finally exited your child seat.
Yeah, got my
Um,
driver's license and,
yeah, got your driver's license, was able to leave the booster seat. There you go.
Mhm.
But no, seriously, like the recommendation now is that children sit rear facing for as long as possible. And that can mean that you could be a 50th percentile girl sitting rear facing well into your elementary school years. It's a very long recommendation, and there's good logic behind it because the bones and connective tissues in children's necks are not as sturdy as they are in adults. And the younger the child is, the more disproportionate the head is to the rest of the body because we come out with watermelons basically. And so there's just so much more stress on those tiny connective tissues when they're younger. And it's also important to remember that age and gender are the biggest factors in this development here. Kids are very similar when they're young, gender to gender, and that changes as they get older, but age is that factor. So if you have a 70-pound, child that's the same age as a 30-pound child, it does not mean that that heavier child actually has stronger connective tissues. They actually have more to worry about because they have more mass. So follow the recommendations. You can decide personally how long you really want to keep your kids rear facing, but do it as long as you can possibly do it is the recommendation, which is why we find child seats that will do rear facing kids up to, I think it's like 65 pounds is where some of those stop. And then you're from there finally into a forward facing seat. And then from there, you end up in a booster seat, which can still be attached via a latch anchor, and you'll still want those tilt slide things forward. So that's my thought process there. What do you got to add there, Travis?
Well, Alex is definitely going to be the expert on your child safety restraints, so I just go with what he said. Honestly,
Travis says, get a vasectomy.
or other forms of birth control and safe sex practices. I would say that the only thing missing from here for me is something that's like a bit of a tweener, something like the Kia Sorento, where it
Mhm.
is a small 3-row option, and that gives you room for growth potentially and just a little bit more capacity, and it still keeps a lot of the same powertrain options that you get in something like the Sportage or the
Mhm.
Tucson. So you can get hybrid, regular, internal combustion or plug-in hybrid options. And there are just not a whole lot of those available. So that's kind
It's
of the
true.
only one I would add. And if I was going bigger, we have a bigger price tag here. I'd probably lean towards something like the Acadia, built in a very similar way as that Traverse, but just a little bit nicer inside.
Yeah, the only caution I would give on Sorrento and Highlander, both, because they're about the same size inside,
Mhm.
just tends to be how tall is the driver, and how many kids are you having kind of thing, because the addition of the third row means that second row actually moves a little bit further forward than you might think compared to some
Mhm.
three rows, so things could be a little bit tight.
And I
Now,
think
you
if
know,
you have a very tall family, so
yeah.
both parents, both people who are going to sit up front regularly are very tall, then obviously that's something you're going to have to consider. But chances are that one is shorter than the other, and you can always move the seat left or right, kind of as needed in those circumstances.
Yep, I mean, it's like we're like T minus 21 weeks till the drama begins, and I have no idea how long my child will sit rear facing. So, do as I say, not as I do, because, you know, screaming kids in the
TBD.
back seat are a thing. And I will probably soon understand why you hear horrible stories about kids or parents going like, does baby need a Benadryl? Mommy needs to sleep. So
And on
with
that note,
with that out of the way, be sure and leave us the feedback, the comments, the reviews. It does help. We do read them. We are beyond reading every comment on the main channel, but the benefit of being an early starter here is that we actually read all of your comments. Awkward close, press the button. What did I press?
that was the clapping.
Oh, there we go. Let's do some more clapping.
Mhm.
See everybody later.
Thanks for joining.
If you're looking for a new or used car to buy, maybe a truck or SUV or all-electric ride, we're the guys to help you decide. Here on the Auto Buyer's Guide. If discussions about donuts in the parking lot is what you came here looking for, well then my friend you're lost. Because our very human host Alex, we swear he's not a boss. Does he respect the cars a lot? He does perhaps